A new case begins, that of a man accused of murdering a woman, setting her house on fire, and abducting her 2 young children. Following an Amber Alert and desperate search, the suspect was arrested. And now the legal battle begins as we try to piece together how this happened and why. We bring on Utah anchor and reporter Brian Schnee to discuss. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Really disturbing story happening in Utah we want to bring to you. So we have 29-year-old Ricardo Trujillo Rojel been charged with aggravated murder and arson for allegedly killing 23-year-old Mayra Catalan-Dimas, setting fire to her home, this trailer, and taking Mayra's 2 children, a 2-year-old and 3-year-old. And reporting from KSL indicates that Rojel is actually, in fact, the father. This was back on March 24th out in Riverdale, north of Salt Lake City. So according to a police booking affidavit based upon a responding officer, quote, the trailer was filled with smoke and the responding officer saw a female laying on the ground near the doorway. The female victim had severe burn marks on her body. Now, thankfully, after an Amber Alert was issued, the search for the kids and Rojel ended that evening with a tipster calling in at 7:30 p.m. about seeing a white Ford F-150 apparently disabled a quarter-mile up the left fork of Hobble Creek Canyon. This is according to the Utah County Sheriff's Office. This is about, by the way, 85 miles away in Weber County. Quote, the vehicle matched the description of the suspect vehicle in an Amber Alert from earlier on Monday, March 24th, 2025. An adult male and 2 children were seen walking away from the truck. This is all according to deputies. And in fact, a license plate reader reportedly also noted the vehicle in the Spanish Fork area in the afternoon. So deputies said they arrived, they saved the children, and they arrested Trujillo Rojel. And according to KSL, he allegedly assaulted one of the law enforcement officers. Authorities gave the kids to the Utah Division of Child and Family Services, although according to USA Today, the children were placed with the family. And before we get into this more, a GoFundMe page has been set up that we're going to put up there for you as well in case you'd like to contribute. It reads, it is with great sadness and a heavy heart that we share the tragic loss of our beloved daughter, sister, mother, and friend, Mayra Dimas, who was tragically murdered on March 24th, 2025. Her absence has left a void that words can't express. Mayra leaves behind her 2 beautiful children who were the light of her life. In this devastating time of grief, we kindly ask for any support to help with expenses to lay her to rest, whether through a donation, sharing, or offering prayers. We're incredibly grateful for your kindness as we navigate this heartbreaking moment and try to find peace in the midst of our loss. May you rest in peace, Mayra. You will forever remain in our hearts. We're going to break down all aspects of this tragic story, what led up to this, the background, and it is such a high-profile case. And when we talk about a high-profile case in Utah, we want to bring in friend of the show, anchor reporter from KUTV 2 News, Brian Schnee, to talk more about it. Brian, so good to see you. What can you tell us about Trujillo Rojel and Mayra's relationship? I mean, any idea about what led to this?
Well, there is a history there with domestic violence, and I know it strikes a chord, right, when we talk about this subject, because we can get to this point of it going to the next level. Now, I wouldn't say the next level is this. There was already 2 other instances of physical harm to Mayra Catalan-Dimas. And this dates back to almost 2021 at this point. So I've talked to a number of people about domestic violence, not just in Utah, but just the topic over the years. And I talked to a criminal defense attorney the day after this happened, who handles the most DV cases in the state and even works to change legislation and works with our lawmakers as kind of a policy liaison, if you will, for the Utah bar. So we talked about some of these things, and it's interesting because it gets to this level. And most domestic related incidents don't go past the first time, according to him. But it also is interesting when you look at after a domestic related incident, most people don't leave the alleged abuser or the convicted abuser. They stay together not because they're scared, but because of financial or because of children. And this case involves 2 young children and also probably some financial. That is just a guess at this point. But when you look at these 2 individuals, they were not married, but they had been dating or been together for quite a while, at least a few years, and had 2 young children, ages 2 and 3. And one of the domestic related instances that took place back in 2021 happened when she was pregnant. So there's a lot of deep roots to this that are really disturbing and really disappointing, that something more could not have been done to prevent, which is always what we talk about. How do you prevent something like this from happening? And I just don't have that answer.
Horrible story, but it's an important one. It's an important one to discuss nonetheless. And for that, I want to thank our sponsor, Upside, because it's with their support that helps us to keep on doing this, bringing you these stories. Now, Upside, if you don't know what it is great. It's a free app that gets you cash back when you buy daily essentials. So when I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch at, let's say, Chipotle, I can use Upside. Maybe I get something at 7-Eleven, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when you do all these things, right? And this is real cashback. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using your debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen, and make sure to use our promo code Sidebar because you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Hope you can check it out. His criminal history is very interesting. I understand there might have been an ongoing domestic assault case from January 2025. I also understand that maybe the incident that you're referring to before, that he received some sort of a suspended sentence, right, for assault and kidnapping. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and these are two completely different instances. One of these happened back in 2021, back in the Salt Lake Valley when they lived a little bit closer to Salt Lake City. Riverdale is north of Salt Lake City. By the way, Jesse, in Utah, it is Weber County. I had to adjust.
Oh, is that right? Oh, wow. Okay.
Our esteemed host here, but it is Weber County. Think Weber State. Think Damian Lillard. You know, if you want to do sports reference.
I'm incredibly narcissistic. What can I say?
So back in 2021, this was more significant than what happened in January. There was a moment where he strangles Mayra, accuses her of being unfaithful. She's 14 months pregnant at this point, holds her against her will, breaks her cell phone, doesn't let her leave. It's terrible sort of domestic things that, unfortunately, an instance like that you read about almost daily if you look through courts. This is happening. This is happening everywhere. But in this instance, the charges were aggravated assault and they were an aggravated kidnapping. And they were actually dismissed with prejudice. The only misdemeanor assault charge actually stuck in this case. And when you have an instance like this, you know, it's he said, she said, what sort of witnesses can you build up? Maybe did statements back off over time from the victim? Did she not want to move forward with these things to prevent a father not being there for the young child? Ultimately, Trujillo Rojel was granted the ability to be there for the birth of his child, but still had that sort of suspended sentence, probation, had to go through treatment because there was a substance abuse sort of issue there. By the way, we see that pattern with, I believe, methamphetamine use, not just from 2021, but to the instance back in January as well that we'll talk about here that was a little bit, in a way, lighter, basically involved property destruction and wasn't a lot of physical harm to Mayra at the time. But this one back from 2021 is a clear red flag. And the public safety assessment would show that there was clear issues here. It's this he said, she said sort of thing. And again, accusing somebody of being unfaithful while she was pregnant. And that's really where the history starts when we look at the domestic situation between these two, at least what's been reported, right? Or what's been called by police agencies filing some of these reports in our court system. So it goes back to something really tough to read back in June 2021. And then we see the end result of what took place here recently in Utah, because this situation clearly never fully resolved between these two, or at least with one party.
And that's what the allegations are right now. And I want to talk to you about the timeline. So let's start from January 2025, what we know about that, and then let's move into the timeline leading into Mayra's death, if you can.
Well, the officer wrote that he went to go check out this same location, by the way, where the actual death took place just a few months later. And it wasn't really as egregious as what happened back in 2021. I mean, there was alleged drug use that Trujillo Rojel was under the influence, believed to be methamphetamine. They found actually powder around his lips. They wrote that in the report. He left the home to go to another trailer nearby where I believe his family lives. He has a family member that lives in that same mobile home park. But it was a domestic violence related charge, property damage, and possession and intoxication charges because they found other things on him as well. Basically went through the home, broke a window, was allowed in the home for whatever reason by a family member or by someone else who was there, started ripping things, pictures off the walls, throwing them, really damaging things, and then just took off. Police found him again and then located him shortly thereafter in that close proximity. Meth was found on him. And again, he had that sort of white powdery substance again around his lips. And that was really glaring when you look at this, is that this individual was likely intoxicated while doing these things and destroying property in a home that apparently, as we learned, they were trying to move out of, which comes at a later date as part of the topic of conversation of what happened here in late March.
That's what was happening on the day that she died. She was moving out, right? What do we know about that?
Well, they were planning to move together, right? Or at least leave that area. I don't know the specifics of where they were going. We've learned a little bit more about them since. Obviously, you saw the work vehicle that was tracked as part of what was happening in Utah that day from the Amber Alert, which kudos to our law enforcement here in the state for really ramping up the ability to use that Amber Alert system without the camera detection that's in place for license plate readers, without the sophistication of an Amber Alert system here in Utah. By the way, they just ran Amber Alert testing in Utah just yesterday, where we got a test on our phone because they may have wanted to make some tweaks after what happened. The interesting piece, and I know we can get into this at a later time, is they didn't know the license plate right away, but once they had that ramped up the search for that vehicle that day. So we knew that they were moving somewhere. We know that they have some roots in Brigham City, where there's a business up there that we believe they may have owned. It was like a card shop of sorts. Or there's also this company that he was working for that you see on the side of that truck. So it's kind of unclear at this point exactly where these two were working, but we do know that they were working. The community knew Mayra well, which is why there's so much outpouring of support for her through not just a GoFundMe, but local businesses doing fundraisers for her. A really beloved woman in this community in northern Utah that a lot of people really knew. So it's beyond just the crime here. It's how is this community coping for a young mother who had a 2 and a 3-year-old who clearly went through it in this relationship when you look at just the 2 other instances before what took place here, Jesse?
It's devastating. And I mean, even if you read some details of the police affidavit where it says, quote, another neighbor stated she heard a female scream sometime before officers arrived at the structure fire. You just think about what the neighbors in the community might be thinking about this. But by the way, how do we know exactly the circumstances surrounding this killing? In the sense, if he did this, I read something that he called her back to the home. She was out with her mother. I mean, what do we know about the circumstances leading up to Mayra's killing?
Because they were apparently moving, he called her back. That's what we understand too. And that was written in one of the reports too. It was one of the probable cause affidavits. And the warrants aren't out right now and unsealed. I actually just checked before our conversation. With warrants here in Utah, they could let them be released 21 days after, upwards to 6 months. So we might not see some of those search warrants for that property and the vehicle that typically lend a lot more detail depending on how detail-oriented the officers want to be. So he calls her back. We understand. This is in the middle of the afternoon, by the way, because the structure fire call out was at 2:45. I remember this vividly because we heard the structure fire call out in our newsroom. And we had a crew kind of going up there shortly after. They were finishing something else up. And the timeline suggests firefighters get on scene. Police are there as well. They pulled her out rather quickly. Not a big fire, by the way. He definitely did not achieve that part of what I believe the attempt was. And they knocked down the fire rather quickly. You think of a mobile home or a trailer, they can go up quick. We've seen it happen time and time again, just catches and goes. And this didn't happen. There wasn't this massive plume of smoke and this catastrophic damage and this concern of it jumping to a nearby home. There was none of that, but they did quickly find her, and an officer pulls her out and notices the stab wound to the neck. So she was declared deceased, I believe, on scene there too, after maybe an attempt to save her life. But there was the stabbing from what we understand, and then trying to set the trailer on fire. There was, of course, his blood located in the trailer and again later. So it didn't pull off the crime as planned, I imagine. But at the end of the day, I think it made this investigation a little bit easier and quicker for law enforcement because the fire didn't do the damage and they found her rather quickly, maybe a minor burn, but really they noticed the stab wounds to the neck rather quickly and determined as a homicide investigation with the attempt of arson on top of it.
And we all know that one of the reasons that people set fire to these scenes is to destroy evidence, right? Because there is a possibility. You talk about the puncture wound to the neck, and I don't believe we're entirely clear what was used for that puncture mark, that puncture wound, unless you know.
It was a item that he later admitted to, believed to be a knife, throwing out on the freeway as he was escaping. So he admitted to it, at least in one of the documents, throwing the knife out of his truck. somewhere believed to be along I-15, which runs from the Ogden area back down to Salt Lake and even further south, which is what allowed him to peel off into Spanish Fork and eventually into Hobble Creek Canyon. And he admitted to, at one point, throwing the weapon believed to be a sharp object of a knife of sorts out of the window. So yes, something likely had in his possession, then just tried to get rid of it after he realized quickly what was taking place.
What else did he tell investigators, as far as you know, when he was interviewed?
Well, not a whole lot. I mean, I think at this point, we're still waiting to learn more about maybe any admission of guilt or his timeline and those things. And listen, just had an initial appearance the other day and doesn't have a preliminary scheduled for, at this point, if we look at the date, a month and a week. And we all know how that goes, Jesse. That can be pushed out. That can be postponed. It can be waived. A lot of things can happen between now and then. Not a lot of other things have been filed in the court filings pertaining to this case, because I did look to see if there were any other documents that we could share with you in terms of things that have already been put out. But again, this was about a week ago and really caught a ton of people by surprise because of the events that transpired with the fire, with the homicide, with the two children, with the Amber Alert, and then everybody in the state of Utah looking for this vehicle, which at one point we didn't know the license plate. We didn't have a good picture of it. And then shortly thereafter, I want to say less than an hour after that Amber Alert went out, we finally got a better look at what we were looking for. And that allowed the public to really step up and find this guy before he was able to ultimately turn around and go a different direction and maybe escape.
I have a bunch of questions about that. Just putting a bow on the fire, I understand that authorities believe an accelerant was used, that this gas can was found outside.
Yep.
It was found inside the trailer. Talk to me about, did they find any evidence in his truck? We've been talking about the truck. You've been talking about the truck. Did they find anything in his truck?
Blood. Blood was detected on some of the clothing there, and obviously they pulled that clothing. I don't believe they found any other sort of accelerant, but again, that's what I was hoping to find when we learned about some of these warrants that law enforcement are putting, because they'll submit for this truck. You find evidence in here, they want a DNA swab, they want to do all these things, which obviously they've already done at this point, and the warrant clearly was probably signed, but we won't see it for at least, depending on how the officers filed this, could be 21 days or at least a week or two from now. But all we know is that blood was found in the vehicle and also blood at the scene, and discarding some of the clothing at the scene. We didn't hear about another accelerant in the vehicle, but just very descriptive blood from either him or Mayra located in that vehicle, which was probably 50, 60, 70 miles away at that point.
Do we have any idea what he was planning with the kids, why he was in that area where he was ultimately apprehended?
Well, if he knew where he was going, he wouldn't have driven up that road. High country right now still has snow in that area, and there are gates at the end of a lot of these canyons in our beautiful state that don't allow you to drive with a normal vehicle back into the national forest and loop around. So we don't know where he was going because he didn't have a way out of that canyon, which is kind of the big lingering question is, where were you thinking about taking these two children? Before the license plate came out, it was just a white work truck from a very dark colored picture. You couldn't even make out the lettering on the side. And people were calling in the law enforcement all across the state. Hey, I just saw a white work truck. Hey, I just saw a white work truck. I mean, down in southern Utah, far away from where he was found, people were making these reports, and law enforcement was staging on the freeway looking for these vehicles. And then finally the license plate comes out, and then finally a better picture comes out of what this vehicle actually looked like. And the best part about the investigation and watching it unfold in front of our eyes was the picture from the license plate reader in Spanish Fork on a surface road, not on the freeway. And once we saw that picture, some of us really kind of were talking about this of, he's no longer on I-15 and probably not heading south on I-15 clear towards Vegas or clear to try to get out towards California or Arizona or any of these other bordering states or nearby states where people will try to get away from and rather go to. So he gets off the freeway, presumably in Spanish Fork, which is in southern Utah County. I drove through it just yesterday coming back from southeastern Utah, and he tries to go up this canyon. I don't think he knew where he was going or what he was doing, because at that point, you wouldn't go up that road with no plan. And he was just pulled over on the side of the road.
It's a really, really good point. Talk to me about this report that he allegedly assaulted one of the officers. He was further resisting law enforcement when he was captured. What do we know about that?
Yeah, the Utah County Sheriff's Office, who does a great job, by the way, and historically has been one of the more transparent departments in Utah since I've been here. They did elaborate a little bit. They didn't say punches were thrown or anything, but there was a resisting moment. Not clear exactly how much of a resistance there was. I think at this point, we're trying to see what records they will release to us per state statute of the Government Records Act that, by the way, will have some big adjustments here in the next coming months because of legislation. But we were hoping to find with either body camera video or dash camera video, depending on the responding deputy, was there a real scuffle there, or was he just not wanting to come out of the truck, or was there a little resistance when putting the cuffs on? We don't know much more about, other than they said in a report, or at least Sergeant Ormond with the Utah County Sheriff's Office told a lot of local media outlets that followed up on it that day, is that he did resist, but it's not really clear how much of a resistance. I think they were probably waiting to see exactly what they could find in terms of evidence too before putting that out there. So I don't know if punches were thrown or anything egregious at this point, because at the end of the day, he was pulled over on the side of this canyon road with his two young kids.
And he was uncooperative. I saw this from a arrest report. He was uncooperative. It says uncooperative with CSI and a blood technician when he was served with warrants. So it just adds to the interesting aspect of this. I want to talk about the kids. Let's end with the kids. Do you have any update on how they're doing, where they are? This is a nightmare for them when you think about their new reality. Any word on what's going on with those children?
Well, immediately they were placed in state custody, right? And then shortly thereafter, we understand were placed into back with family. So we know that Trujillo Rojel and both Mayra and Ricardo have family here, because when I looked back into Ricardo's documents about his substance abuse assessments, as we learned in early March 2024, he has family in a neighboring city. He was staying with them while they were trying to work out some things while he was going through his substance abuse treatment. And it was mentioned in those documentation that he was living with another family member. I believe it was a sibling of his. Now, Mayra also has family locally, so we understand the children are at least with family. Now, are they chipper and in great spirits? They're 2 and 3, right? So probably at this point, just trying to figure out how to say a couple more words and develop. I have a 3-year-old, so I'm just saying this as a parent of a 3-year-old. I don't know if they will ever really understand the trauma, and you would hope, because they're at such a young age, maybe they won't remember a lot of these things, you'd hope, when they get older. But we don't know the true status of how the kids are. The families have been relatively tight-lipped, and a lot of the community members have been talking. I do know at least one of my colleagues here was trying to just get some sort of something in writing from the family. I believe it was Myra's father. They're still trying to figure all this out. And we don't know at this point if the kids had any injuries. I don't believe they did. And it seemed like they were unharmed. So at this point, you'd have to imagine they're just trying to process, where's mom? Which is any question from any young kid is, where's mom? And normally you'd say, well, mom's at the grocery store. But in this instance, it's very different for these two children.
It's heartbreaking. And
it hurts as a dad to say that, Jesse.
It really is.
It really does. I mean, I think about the first thing I thought about immediately was I have a 3-year-old, and you're taking a 2 and a 3-year-old on this probably high-speed, stressful joyride after taking the life of their mother, who had already been through the ringer with this guy when you look at history and its past. So I feel for this family. I feel for everybody that was involved, because I'm just really glad the Amber Alert system worked in Utah, as it has done time and time again, and they continue to try to perfect it in a really imperfect world sometimes when technology doesn't work. On that subject, when they learned the license plate, the first thing they tried to do was not only put that out to local media, because we have a large broadcast reach, but put them on all the billboards, on all the signs on the freeways. And I actually talked to Utah Department of Transportation. I said, hey, when are you getting this up there? And he said, our team's on it. They're trying to get this up there rather quick. So I can't speak highly enough about our state folks that helped solve this and give the public a best chance to make this phone call when they spot the vehicle.
It's amazing. It's incredible, because there could have been a different result to this in a lot of different ways. So
we could still be talking about this now of where are the kids.
You mentioned the community. I want to end on this. How is the community reacting to this? And I understand even flowers have been placed outside of that Riverdale home. Talk to us about how the community is dealing with this.
Well, there's a pretty big outpouring of support. Like I alluded to, it sounds like a lot of folks in this community in northern Utah, in Weber County and in the surrounding counties, may have known Mayra pretty well. And we're still working to learn a little bit more about that reach. But there are some events taking place, I believe, on April 5th. over the course of the weekend to try to raise some money for the family. Obviously, financial situations, when you lose some things in that home, but also lose a loved one, trying to make sure these children are set up, because at this point, dad won't be there, right? Because of the what's going to happen here. There's a lot of evidence that points to what took place, but the community is rallying around Mayra and their family as best as they can, not just through GoFundMe's and fundraisers, but actual events and outpouring of support, laying flowers and trying to be supportive of somebody that apparently had a pretty big reach in a lot of these smaller communities outside of Ogden and Weber County.
Brian Schnee, KUTV 2 News, excellent reporting on this. Thank you so much for the work you're doing on this, and it was really great seeing you. Thank you for doing this.
As always, Jesse, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us, and as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.